Hello and welcome to this video in which we are going to go over the 4 biggest challenges that students face while preparing for the FE Electrical and Computer exam. Part of doing your homework whenever you're starting a big project involves making a list of all the challenges and the roadblocks that you're going to encounter when you get on to that journey of finishing that project. And FE Electrical and Computer exam is actually a big project. It's a big undertaking. And based on my personal experience, my observation and interactions with students over the years, I've compiled a list of 4 big challenges that I personally encountered and I see a lot of students encountering when they're preparing for the FE Electrical and Computer exam. Challenge number 1. The first challenge happens to be lack of motivation. FE exam is typically one of the 2 exams that you need to pass in order to become licensed in the US. Now, if you get an exemption for FE exam, then you may only have to pass the PE exam, but exemptions are pretty rare and you have to go through a pretty rigorous process and they're evaluated on case-by-case basis. So assuming that you take the standard route and you go about trying to pass the FE exam, it takes a lot of time, effort, and also investment of your money. That's true for both FE as well as the PE exam. And the fact is that the failure rate on both of these exams is pretty high. For FE exam, if you have graduated within the 12 months or so, then the failure rate is for the FE Electrical, it's about 25%. And obviously, if you've been out of school longer, although NCEES doesn't keep stats on it, or at least the stats are not visible or posted on their website, then I can only imagine that the failure rate is going to be higher and higher and higher. And in fact, a lot of students I've noticed that who take the FE exam tend to be between the 5 to 10 year mark of work experience. So they've been out of school for about 5+ years, and some are 10+ years, and even 15 and 20+ years. So it becomes more and more difficult. So the lack of motivation is a big challenge because in a lot of jobs, you can actually get started with your career without having cleared the FE exam, without having your PE license. And for the most part, you can actually carry on with your career and finish up your career without ever having the need to get the PE license. So that's where determining or conceptualizing or trying to make sense of why is it necessary for me to put in so much time and effort in order to get the PE license, right? When your job may never require it. Well, the fact remains that even if your employer is not asking you to get the PE license, even if your current job doesn't require it, you never know, because there are obvious advantages in getting the PE license. It opens many doors and it also allows you to get higher salary. And you can actually check out the links in the video where there are surveys done and they compare that PE license holders, generally speaking, they are compensated better than the non-PE license holders. So the motivational piece of trying to convince your own self as to why I need to put in this amount of time, effort, and invest my money in getting these 2 exams done is probably the single biggest roadblock that I find. And that brings me back to the point where I notice a lot of students who are actually taking the FE exam end up being in the 5 to 10 or 10 to 15 year mark. And the reason for that, as per my understanding, is that once they progress through their career and they reach that 5-year mark or 7-year mark and 8-year mark, and they start wondering, okay, why I'm not getting the promotion that I expected, or why I'm not getting the salary raise, or why the career is not progressing as quickly as I expected, then they realize that there's actually a ceiling. Okay, that ceiling might be visible or it might be invisible. And that particular ceiling has to do with the fact that at this point in time, you don't have your PE license. And in some companies, some employers would have it very clearly listed. If you want to go from an intermediate engineer to a senior engineer, then one of the many requirements is that you should have your PE license. So that's when they start actually preparing for the FE exam. Then they put in the time and effort, and at that point in time it is difficult. It's a difficult exam regardless of when you take it, but the sooner you take it, the better off you will be. So the actionable advice in terms of getting over this particular challenge of lack of motivation is that remind yourself that even if your job currently does not require you to clear the FE exam and doesn't require the PE license, the sooner you do it, the better it will be. Because FE electrical and computer exam covers entire spectrum of courses that you would have taken in your undergraduate. It contains 17 specific sections according to the latest specification and covers the entire electrical and computer engineering coursework, minus all the electives that you might have had to take in order to complete your degree. But remembering all of those details is quite challenging. Your best shot is to take it as soon as possible, ideally when you are in your 4th year of university, if not then the year you graduate, if not then the following year. And the sooner you take it, the better off you'll be. And you don't want to procrastinate or put it off so long that you essentially have to start from scratch, which you will if you put it off, in my opinion, anywhere past 7 years. And at that time, you will probably be working full time. You might have your personal commitments, professional commitments, and getting time out of your daily routine becomes more and more difficult. So put yourself in your own shoes 5 years from now, 7 years from now, and look back and see whether you would have been better off taking the exam sooner rather than later. Even if you are at a 10-year mark right now or a 15-year mark right now, remember that you have at least 20, 25, 30, or even 35 years of career ahead of you. So it's never too late. The other way to motivate yourself is that remember that a lot of employers are now starting, especially in power systems engineering, they're starting to ask for FE, having cleared FE exam, having the EIT certification, even for entry-level jobs. Even if you are just about to graduate and you don't have a job lined up, and even if you have a job lined up, then remember that your employer would probably be more interested in someone who is working towards his or her PE licensure. And the best way to indicate that commitment to your employer is by getting your FE exam out of the way. Then you can bring that certification, EIT certification, into your interviews. You can, if you don't have EIT certification, you can even bring your FE exam cleared result from NCEES and show it in your interviews, and maybe even add it as part of your cover letters or as part of your resumes, because it will clearly demonstrate to the employer that this particular candidate is very serious about his or her career and wants to go all the way with the PE licensure. Because remember, it is always easier for the employers to help someone within the company grow through their ranks so that that person has demonstrated successes, and if that person is also working on his or her credentials, then that is a bonus. And these are the kind of individuals that a long-term employer would want to sort of nourish so that you can be prepared for bigger and better things in the future. Challenge number 2, exam preparation resources. Now, once you've decided that you want to take this exam and get onto the path of your PE licensure, which is a long journey, because even after clearing your FE electrical and computer exam, you have to pass the PE exam, which would take X number of months depending on how much time you are able to put in to prepare. And even after completing the PE exam, you have to make sure that you accumulate the 4 or 5 years of experience that your respective boards require, and produce the documentation, the references, your degrees, background checks, and all of that. So it is a long journey. But once you have decided to take the FE exam, then the next challenge, which is this challenge number 2, is exam preparation resources. So which resources should you use in order to prepare for the exam, and which resources are going to help you streamline your exam preparation effort? Because remember that you're investing three things when you are preparing for both the FE and the PE exams. The first one is pretty obvious, your time. The second one, maybe not so much obvious, is your energy. And the third one is the money that you're investing. Now, I listed them in this particular order because a lot of times students think that, okay, I'm investing money in this because I'm buying a particular resource. Well, if you think about it, in grand scheme of things, when you're preparing for the exam and the fact that you've completed 4 years of undergraduate engineering, and maybe in some cases you might even have done graduate studies. I've had students who have done PhDs, and even after doing PhDs, they basically realize that for them to get recognized in the industry, they need to clear the FE exam, they need to do the PE power exam if they're in the power field. But so you've done all of that hard work in order to obtain your degrees, right? So that additional bit of cost that you incur for exam registration and exam preparation resources, it can be significant. But if you're working full time, then, or even if you're not working full time, if you're actively looking for jobs, probably your time and your energy that you spend in preparing for this exam is much more valuable, in the sense that this exam takes 4 to 5 months of preparation. Now, there are exceptions, obviously. You can have somebody who is just graduating who can pass the exam with 2 months of preparation, or somebody who's still in school and most of the concepts are still fresh in his or her memory, and that particular person can pass maybe in 1.5 months, okay, just with few weeks of preparation. But those are outliers. Those are generally not the norms. As I said, for me, the students that end up taking my course and interact with me, a lot of them are actually with the 5+ years of experience, and they're working full time. So for them, the kind of resources that they're looking for are the ones that avoid the overhead in terms of doing the research, overhead in terms of guessing whether what I'm studying is relevant for the exam or not, overhead in the sense of revisiting the basics over and over again, and being in that continuous state of double guessing whether the exam preparation resource is really putting them on the track for success. So the kind of resources that you need are the ones that can effectively streamline your exam preparation effort and make and respect your time and energy as well. So I have put together a 3-step framework which I discuss in the webinar. It's an hour-long free webinar. You can sign up for it. The link is given in the video. And in this 1 hour long webinar, I go over the 3-step framework. Essentially, the 3-step framework starts with having the right mindset, because if you are in the zone and if you're committed to passing this exam, then you will make it happen. But remember, if you are tentative and you are not very clear about what is the outcome that you desire, well, the outcome that you desire is obviously passing the exam, but how intensely you want that, right? What are the sacrifices that you are willing to make in order to get there? And the sacrifices are basically your time, the investment you're making, the effort that you're putting in, right? So if you're very clear that come hell or high water, I'm going to get done with this exam, then you are in that framework, in that mindset that you will put in however long it takes you to get this done, okay? So having the right mindset is very important. That's the first point that I discuss in quite a bit of detail with several examples in the webinar. The second step, or the second component of the 3-step framework, is coming up with a game plan, developing a plan on tackling this exam. Again, as I said, 17 sections of the specification basically cover entire undergraduate engineering, electrical and computer engineering. So how do you go about targeting those 17 sections? How do you prepare for those 17 sections? Now, everyone has different strengths and weaknesses, and you have to make sure that you're very conscious of not only your strengths but also your weaknesses, because you can then do some planning accordingly. So developing a game plan that is suitable and tailored to your particular profile is very important. And the third and the final step is working the plan. So once you have developed that plan, then execution is probably the most important step. Once you've gone through getting into the right mindset and then developing a game plan and then execution. So I discuss all of these components and also discuss a 4-month exam preparation calendar. I also discuss my exam preparation resources and share the experience of some of the students that have successfully passed this exam in the first attempt in the webinar. So for more details on it, I would recommend you to check out the webinar and register for this webinar. It is completely free. The third challenge that I mostly hear about from students, and I personally had to overcome it as well when I was preparing for my FE electrical and computer exam, was having a busy schedule. I was working full time, and with personal and professional commitments, it seemed so difficult to take time out of the daily routines in order to prepare for this exam. Now, as I mentioned earlier, a fair portion, or I would say a majority of my students who are enrolled in my course and use my resources, a lot of them tend to be already working full time. And part of the reason, as I explained earlier, is because once you enter into the workforce, once you enter into the industry, you basically start realizing the importance of PE licensure. Maybe your supervisor has a PE license, maybe his or her supervisor has a PE license, maybe the senior managers have all PE licenses, maybe you see people with other credentials who are not as far ahead in the workplace as compared to the ones who have PE licenses. So for whatever reason, you start making those connections, you start connecting those points, and you realize, okay, now it is time for me to actually dive into FE electrical and computer exam preparation and get on to the journey of the PE licensure. But typically that would happen if you are going by your own observations. Typically that would happen at 3-year, maybe 4-year, maybe 5-year mark. And as I said earlier, sometimes it would be the fact that you got overlooked for a promotion or you didn't get a salary raise. That's when you might basically tell yourself that it's about time to get ready for the PE license and pass my FE exam. And maybe you are applying for a job elsewhere and there's a clear requirement that you have to have a PE license. So whatever that motivator is, it's typically at that point in time through your personal observation that you will basically get to see that. But busy schedule, your schedule is going to get busier and busier and busier as you progress through your professional life and personal life. And how can you tackle it? Well, time management is obviously the solution. Some of the most successful people also tend to be the busiest people. So time management is a lifelong skill that each one of us should learn. And unfortunately, it is not something that can be covered. Or like everyone has different profiles, different demands on their time. But what I've done is I put together a 4-month schedule. As I mentioned earlier, I shared this 4-month schedule in the webinar as well. You can download the 4-month schedule. It's a PDF, and that can help you take a high-level overview of what your exam preparation would look like. So I have basically broken down different sections of the exam specification in different weeks. So starting from week number 1, you're going to go through math, and then week number 2, you're going to go through another section. And for some sections, there are multiple weeks that you need to dedicate, how much time you should be dedicating to theory, how many days you should be allocating to the problem sets. And on top of that, a general advice would be habit formation. So if you can somehow incorporate your FE exam preparation in your daily routine, whether it is before work, whether it is during your lunchtime, or whether it is right after coming from work, or before sleeping, or getting up a little bit early or staying a little bit late. So whatever that routine ends up being, if you can create a habit out of it, because once you make a habit, then you will be in an autopilot mode. You will subconsciously start working on it, right? Because then you won't have to make that decision every time you're about to sit and study, because it is now part of your routine. You will automatically start doing it. And it takes maybe 1 week for some of us, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 30 days. 30 days is a number that I've come across in several readings, that they say that it takes at least 30 days to firm up a habit. So if the exam preparation timeline is 4 to 5 months, then working on that habit for 30 days is well worth the effort. And the Third recommendation I can make is in order to overcome this challenge is keep a notebook, keep a ledger, keep a personal diary, and track how much time you're putting in your exam preparation, and track it on weekly basis. And the weeks that you are doing really well, then review that week. What was happening in your personal life, in your professional life during that week? What were the things that you were able to do better that helped you get more out of that week as compared to maybe the previous weeks? And once you start zoning in on those external aspects of your schedule or your personal and professional life, then you can sort of fine tune your time accordingly. You can plan for things ahead of time. So keeping notes and keeping your personal diary, if you're already in the habit of creating your own diary, that's great. But at least for this exam preparation timeline for 4 to 5 months, that is something that really helped me, and I highly recommend keeping track on a weekly basis. The fourth and final challenge involved in FE electrical and computer exam preparation is the fact that this is an extremely broad scope of study, right? Because you're dealing with 17 sections which cover practically your entire undergraduate electrical and computer engineering curriculum. So all of that compressed in 5 hours and 20 minutes is a pretty challenging ask. And on top of that, the exam is timed, like most of the exams, and the time is roughly 3 minutes per question. So not only do you need to know everything, you need to be able to solve the questions in a very short amount of time. For some questions, in fact, just reading the question itself can take 30 seconds or even a minute. Then you have to do the calculations, then you have to make sense out of your solution, and then go through the options, and maybe if you made a mistake, you might have to correct something. And it is a challenging exam, as I said at the beginning. And in order to prepare for this exam, what is the approach that you need to take? Well, we've already discussed a handful of a lot of actionable items, but in order to tackle this particular challenge in specific, challenge number 4, which is a broad range of exam topics, which I mentioned several times during this video, you need to slice and dice it. Okay, you need to divide these 17 sections into categories, into modules, into segments, whatever you want to call them. And the way I look at it is that if you can combine some of the sections that are similar to each other, then you can develop synergies. And if you can combine some of the sections that by virtue of their weightage are similar, then you can create a separate category for them and say that, okay, you know what, in these 5 or 6 sections, I want to make sure that I do a really good job, or I want to make sure that I stay above average, right? So if you divide those 17 sections into several categories, then taking a bird's eye view will basically reveal that there is sort of overlaps between different sections. There are ways that you can tackle it, right? So if you're standing at the base of the mountain and you look up, chances are that you will be overwhelmed by the task of climbing that mountain. But if you look at it as one hill at a time, then it won't be as intimidating. And the exam itself happens to be intimidating for a lot of students. And the reason is that, okay, they sit down, they look at the NCEES specification one day, and they're like, oh, this is too much. I may never be able to do it. And that negative talk itself would reinforce that idea, which is a fact. It's not even an idea that the exam is difficult. Okay, but you telling yourself that you cannot do it is not helping your cause. So you have to look at that broad specification and slice and dice it. And I will be creating a separate video on this topic of how you can approach those 17 sections so that you can sort of absorb them, you can digest them in pieces. But at a very high level, I would recommend you not to look at this exam as one huge undertaking, but rather than, some mini milestones that you can overcome along the way. A quick recap of this video. We discussed 4 biggest challenges that students encounter while preparing for their FE electrical and computer exams, starting with challenge number 1, which was lack of motivation. Challenge number 2 was exam preparation resources. Challenge number 3 was having a busy schedule. And challenge number 4 was the broad range of topics that are covered in this exam. It's a challenging exam. I hope you found this video helpful, and I would really appreciate if you could like this video and subscribe to this channel, in which I will be discussing more and more details about FE electrical and computer exam preparation, as well as PE power exam preparation. And we'll have some student interviews, we'll discuss some tips and recommendations to prepare for these exams, and also cover some of the commonly asked questions by students who are preparing for this exam. Thank you.